It's like Avengers. Like how many buildings do you see get taken out in those movies? Cars are flung everywhere. If I saw my Honda being thrown through the air, I'd be like, all right,
you'd be furious.
Hulk is my BBEG.
Yeah. Welcome to Plot Girls, the D&D discussion show where storytelling is first up in the initiative order. Stat blocks, they come second. I'm Minty.
And I'm Mitch, and today's topic pertains to my favourite time of the year, Halloween.
Spooky season.
Yeah, we'll be talking about villains, more specifically how to make villains that are engaging, that move the plot, inspire the heroes to fight, and are narratively satisfying to take down.
We're going to be covering different types of villains, from your mini bosses all the way through to your big bad evil guys, BBEGs as we call them. And then we're going to be talking about how to kind of create their motivations to make them more interesting, really dig into what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it, and how that relates to the party and their movements. And then how do we floor a villain? How do we make them potentially redeemable? Romanceable? Who knows? We'll see.
And lastly, we'll be doing our random question encounter where we've prepared 8 questions and we'll be randomizing those questions with the roll of a dice. But first, our cocktail for the day.
Our cocktail for the day. For full transparency, it is currently 12:16 in the afternoon. So this is a coffee. I actually don't even know what kind of coffee it is.
Nespresso, baby.
That'll do. That will do nicely. We just need some go-go juice today. Cheers. And also it's spooky season. Get cozy. If you haven't already, pause this, go and make a coffee, join us.
Today the mists are out as well, so anyone who's currently living in London knows how misty it just is outside.
It's giving Barovia, it's giving villainy.
How apt.
How apt. Villains. This is one we've been excited to talk about. We love a good villain.
Villains are my favourite topic.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We're covering it early doors.
Yeah, it seems maybe a little out of place doing it straight after character creation, but I think what follows very easily is villain creation, so why
absolutely.
not?
For every party there needs to be some kind of antagonist, and I think villains is maybe something that a lot of people think, oh yeah, obviously there's a big bad evil guy, you gotta defeat, the Vecnas and the Strahds of the world, but there's so much more to it, and there could be so much more to it. And there are, as we mentioned, different types of villains, and we have, I say we, but you actually created a very beautiful system for describing different types of villains. If you want to run us through it.
Hey, it's an us project. It's not me.
I'm happy to take some credit for it, but really, I just showed up and did my homework. No, I love the way that your brain has broken it down. If you wouldn't mind, kind of explain that to the people. I
would love to. I think that there are 4 types of villains. You have neutral villains, personal and non-personal villains, and the BBEG. Nice. I'll fill you in about a neutral, and I'll do the non-personal villains. You can do the personal villains in BBEG. Sure. For me, a neutral villain is a force or an event, a weather event, maybe a political system, a social system, or an inequality, something that's not cognizant of the party, but something that is a force of evil or potential evil that the party could choose to overcome or are at least at the whim of. Yeah. Then I think a non-personal villain is a pirate leader. Maybe it's an ally that you've crossed. Maybe it's the leader of a thieves guild. Someone who has the potential for villainy or the potential for maybe being some sort of smaller bad. And you as a party can decide if that's something that you want to infiltrate, you want to take care of it, or maybe you want to make an allyship with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I think with non-personal villains, it makes sense for them to be someone that maybe you encounter along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas with a personal villain, these are what I often refer to as the mini bosses. And this would be probably someone that actually is in someone's backstory. Your kind of childhood bullies, your mentor who's gone rogue, whoever is sitting in that backstory who could become an inconvenience to you. And I feel like obviously that could be an inconvenience to the whole party, but oftentimes it centers on one character and is something about their backstory that you can really start to dig into. Maybe you go back to someone's hometown, you want to explore their daddy issues, you fight their dad. Like fighting dads is a great, honestly, a very important part of D&D is fighting your dad.
It's always in Minty's backstory as well. We know she's got those daddy issues.
Daddy issues are just so ripe with, opportunity, I think. I really need to start exploring some mummy issues. I feel like that's a whole different ballgame. But the personal villains that are, not a problem to the rest of the world and not necessarily a problem to your party, but they are definitely a problem to you. And why is that? Which takes us to the problem for your party, which would be your BBEG. I can never say that nicely without
BBEG.
The big bad, the big boy, the Satan. This is your classic villain. I think this is the one that everyone kind of thinks of when they think villain. It's the Disney villain of the story, the one who just wants to take over the world, or the big monstrosity, whatever it may be.
That's your Strahd.
That's your Strahd.
Your Vecnas.
Yeah,
Jinx.
The classics. we share a brain. And obviously that feels more endgame, which is why I refer to the personal villains as mini bosses, because I think an important part of having these different types of villains is making sure that they create a bit of a spread and a bit of a journey throughout the game. She says, having never run a game. But my experience of being in games is that you often come up against the neutral first, something that is, some kind of infestation.
I already have one.
Yeah?
Twister, the Twister from Twister. You could say that is a neutral villain. It is the big bad of the movie, Twister. Yeah. You can argue that that's a romance film, whatever. I'm not here to argue semantics with you, but it doesn't care about the party.
Nope.
In this case, Helen Hunt and whatever his name is, the original Twister I'm talking about. And it doesn't care about the path it leads. The path it leaves, really, the path of debris. It's not cognizant of anyone's cares. It is neutral. It just is there to destroy.
But it is the villain. It is what needs to be defeated or overcome in some sense. And if you're ever, rocking up to game 2, game 3, and you're like, God, I don't have a villain prepared. The weather. Just change the weather.
There's a blight. Yeah, exactly. It's gotten into the crops. There's
perfect.
Terrible floods.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's not trying to be villainous, but it is the villain in that moment. And I think that's a really nice starting point. And then the random encounter with, like you say, the pirate who just happens to be on the docks, or the mayor who maybe is a bit corrupt. You've not met them before. You don't really need to care, but this is where you can start making some decisions as a party. Like, do we want this person to be our villain for the day? Do we dislike this guy, or do we want to be friends? That's where you can start to throw, within the story, start to throw your players some agency, I think, and go, do you want this to be a villain? They can be. Punch them, see what happens. Or make a deal. Like that. They don't. I think that's a fun one because, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it as a DM. That could go either way, and that could be fun for a DM as well to go, this could be the BBEG if this goes really wrong, or it could be an NPC, an ally for life. Like which direction do they pick?
I really love that because I did have one encounter that I was prepared to talk about earlier, but I think it kind of fits now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my party encountered a doppelganger. Doppelgangers are not excessively powerful. They are really interesting baddies because they can read thoughts and stuff like that. And so I had this doppelganger coming in, pretending to be someone else. The party immediately trusted them. They seemed pretty weak. And this doppelganger infiltrated my group. And eventually the group started to realize there was something off with him. They all kind of turned on him, and it slowly became him becoming aware of their wanting to take him out, drop him off somewhere, or like kill him, which was quite extreme. But he was what I'd consider quite neutral. Not a neutral baddie, but he wasn't evil until he started to realize that they were after him.
Yeah.
And then he escaped in the night. And what I had planned was that he was going to go into every town that they had ever been in and pose as them. And he was going to...
Love that.
And he was going to turn everyone against them so that no matter where they went, there was no hospitality for them.
I love that. I love that so much. And also there's so much you can play around with there, like walking into a tavern for the first time ever and someone being like, you slept with my wife.
Yeah, and like you greeted by a punch in the face.
Amazing. I love that. That's so fun because, like you say, that started off as something that wasn't necessarily a threat, but then became a very real one very quickly. And not even with, like you say, low stat block, not very scary. If they actually got into a fight with him, probably not a problem.
They could have easily fought this guy. It's just that he was clever and he knew his strengths. He played to his strengths, which was to flee And he is someone that I consider just an NPC that was turned into more of a personal villain, or would have become one down the road when they realized what he was doing to sabotage their experience in the world.
That could have gone so many different ways as well. So that's really
he was helping them in combat. He was an ally to some extent. So
yeah, and that also starts to separate out your kind of monstrous villains, or more just monsters that you might come across, like a random owlbear fight, from your more intelligent, the villains with a little bit more potential, where they're not just here to kill you, there's something they want and they're going to figure out how to get it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I think there's nuance in that as well, because I really do think that your villains can be anti-heroes, they can be anti-villains, they can be just plain old villains, but there is so much grey in that spectrum as well. Absolutely.
I mean, even with what you've just described with, this concept of the party wronging a town, they can do that by themselves. And I think it depends obviously on the story you want to tell, the game you want to run, and that's something to discuss with your party. But having, your party on that villainy spectrum is very interesting, I think, and is often something that can shift over time. But I think we talked a lot in our first episode about realism. Nobody's a perfect good guy. There's no such thing. So recognizing that your party or your character could be the villain in someone else's story starts to add so many interesting layers. Because really, if we're telling the story from the perspective of that doppelganger, if it's a book and it's being told from his perspective, they're the villains in his story. They're not the heroes anymore. So I think it's a fun exercise maybe for a DM and a player to think, who is the hero and villain in the story if I look at it from this perspective and from this perspective, and that starts to open up interesting conversations.
There aren't any villains that don't think that they are right.
Yeah.
So from someone's perspective, they are always going to be the person who is right. I had a player recently join a game, just a very quick one-shot that I played, and she played a character whose parents were adventurers, and I had these plans, should it have eventuated into a campaign, that you go out there as the son or the daughter of adventurers thinking like, my parents are well regarded, like they're pretty famous, thinking that people are going to give you a free ride. Actually, no, they caused chaos in their wake, and not everyone loved them, because from some people's perspective, they came in and their village was collateral for these people who thought that they were doing a favor when they were taking out the dragon, but actually they didn't do anything with the dragon corpse. And they destroyed all the houses.
They just left it there to rot.
It's like Avengers. Like how many buildings do you see get taken out in those movies? Cars are flung everywhere. If I saw my Honda being thrown through the air, I'd be like, all right,
you'd be curious.
Hulk is my BBEG.
Yeah, that is such a good point. I think that's such a fun way as well that you kind of brought in maybe an element of surprise for that player. Like, oh, this was not what I expected. That's so fun. And then almost kind of making that character's parents a bit of a villain in their story. They've now made life harder for her. That's so fun. I love that so much. Like you say, there's so much grey. And I think the quicker you accept that, the quicker you can start exploring it through roleplay, rather than going like, no, we're the good guys and that's the bad guy. The second you have like that interesting conversation with someone from your backstory who, you might have written them in as like, this is my rival, we grew up together, but they were always beating me and stuff. The second you get into it at the table, I think allowing your mind to open up to the possibilities of this person might be a little bit more complicated than that can start to, throw up some really interesting situations where maybe this isn't a fight, maybe this is a conversation.
I think that's really apt, especially for anti-villains. I was trying to think of what I consider an anti-villain, or like who I consider an anti-villain.
Yeah.
And I know that The Incredibles is one of your favorite movies.
It is.
I don't remember her name, the one with silver hair.
Mirage.
There you go, Mirage.
Yeah.
Would you consider her an anti-villain? She's villainous in a sense that she is aligned with someone who is doing evil deeds.
Yeah.
But she has like good in her. She has good attributes, and she ends up helping Mr. Incredible. Do you think that she'd be a good representation of an anti-villain to you?
Absolutely. And also a very interesting consideration there for, your villains. They work with people. How do those people around them function? Because Syndrome in The Incredibles is very much, careless, doesn't care about anyone but himself, really, vengeful. And then, like you say, as long as she's aligned with him, you can put her in the same boat. But towards the end, she's the one who helps them get out. Does that redeem her? That's kind of up to you to decide. So yeah, I think she's a very interesting one because she's straddling a bit of a line there, and I think it's up to the viewer to decide whether or not you would kind of befriend her after that, or whether or not they've gone too far. And that's a conversation you can have as a party if you encounter someone like that. Well, they helped us get out in the end. Okay, but do we trust them now? Like there's a lot of interesting tension that can come from that. But yeah, you went straight to my heart with The Incredibles. It's my favorite.
I know how to get there, baby.
Yeah, and Syndrome as well, great villain. That's a villain, I think, there's so many amazing examples, a lot of which I'm sure we'll get into, but that's a great villain for showing that a kind of inciting event can take someone from being what should have been a relatively good person or maybe a normal person and can turn them into, if it snowballs enough, something awful. Because he was just a kid and he just admired someone and then he had his heart broken. And by the time you see him 20 years later, it's just gone way too far and now he's like an arms dealer. So it's like quite extreme, but you do see his backstory. You do understand him a bit. And I don't think it means you need to sympathize with him, but it at least gives you the option to sympathize.
And in that situation, you'd see that Mr. Incredible is his villain.
Yes, he really is.
He is. And Mr. Incredible, for all intents and purposes, is a very good moral hero. But I can't even really remember it. He's like slighted him, or he didn't have enough time for him or something like that.
Yeah, he basically was just like, I don't want an apprentice.
Yeah.
Get lost.
And so he has become his villain. And it's so interesting that you can take such a small inciting event and decide, well, this is the villain origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that obviously then has a massive impact on what that villain is trying to do, what motivates them. For Syndrome, it's all about, he still kind of wants to prove himself, and he's become so obsessed with becoming the hero that he actually starts putting people in danger. He has hero syndrome. There's your fun fact for if you want to know why he's called Syndrome. He has hero syndrome, so he creates danger so that he can be the hero, which is a very bad thing. So I think that's fun that you can start to put those things together in terms of, he's a grown man now, but that inciting event has led to his entire motivation. And I think motivation as well is something that is a really good starting point for when you're creating your villains. What do they want? Like at the end of the day, if they don't want anything, they're not going to do any villainous acts. They need to want something.
Yeah, that's so true. I think we can look at a lot of different types of media. That's what we love to do. Mm-hmm. And find the origin story in that. I think that Jinx and it's Vi. I never know if it's Vi or V. Yeah, Vi. That is such a great origin story for Jinx. And I don't know League of Legends lore. I just know this movie.
We're just arcane girlies.
Yeah, we're just arcane girls. This moment of trauma where Jinx looks around, sees her friends have been killed by Silco's henchmen, and sees her role in it. Vi's harsh words that are spoken in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Vi leaving for like 5 minutes to take a breather, that like triggers her into having like a psychosis, and then Silco being there for her. She then believes that she's been abandoned by her sister, who then gets put in prison and can't get to Jinx anyway. Like, it's such a small moment of miscommunication where Vi has said something in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
Jinx has misinterpreted it. The trauma, the events around her, she's lost a father figure, it all clicks in place. She's fit in with Silco, and now that's her path. But it could have so easily been changed into another route. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that adds weight to this idea of your character is that moment away from becoming the villain. And the villain was, that moment away from being a hero in a story. And I think that's where, maybe as a party, you can start to consider, not just we need to take down this person because they're bad. I think it's so much more interesting when you give the party a bit more information about why that villain became the way they did. And they can maybe start to reverse engineer that and figure out, right, how do we get to them through their emotions? How do we get to them through their motive? Not just how many hit points do they have? It's so much more interesting when you start thinking about different ways to approach that villain based on the fact that they're probably just a human or a humanoid person. Sorry. I need to use more D&D inclusive language. And you can really start to dig into how do we stop them from getting what they want in a slightly more creative way, maybe. I think motivations are interesting as well because they can be really simple, but it's about what the villain does to get that. I think something that we spoke about briefly, which I found really interesting, was if you're completely stuck looking at the 7 deadly sins. I thought that was a really good idea because I have never created a villain. So for me, I would be like, where do I start?
I think that's one of the more simple ways of doing it. Yeah, just are they wrath?
Yeah.
Are they sloth? Like how can they embody this this sin, and what does that look like for your baddie? But there's a lot of, I think there are a lot of masculine ideals of villainy as well. Things like power, glory.
Yeah.
They're these things that you don't really see represented in female villains.
That is true.
When I see female villains, who would be a female villain you could give me off the top of your head?
Maybe I've not seen all of the movies yet. Maybe Pearl.
I'm so in love with Pearl.
A real vengeful, really scary female villain.
I feel that, and you've nailed it, because I do feel like for women, they're usually in a position of like being the underdog, so it's usually revenge.
Yeah,
for them. You could look at trying to make your story a little bit more interesting. Maybe you don't use revenge for a woman, and maybe it doesn't need to be glory or power or these very masculine traits. Like there is so much nuance in it that you can build on, that doesn't need to be seeking for more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think subverting expectations is always a great way of adding more layers to a story, getting your players more invested when you kind of go, here's what you think, here's what's actually happening. And it also, I think any villain that is truly memorable is unexpected, or, you know, once you realize why they are the way they are, it also starts to kind of click. I really like that idea of, I think there's a lot more of it in modern media now, this idea of a female antagonist who is allowed to be evil, who's allowed to be just bad. I feel like there's a lot of, like you say, oh, well, it's a woman, so her motivations are probably more about revenge or grief or guilt or something like that. What if she's just the worst? You know, like, I think that's fun. And I feel like everyone should be allowed to be villainous in that way. Or even kind of playing against type in the sense of, I think when we think villain, we think scary. What if the villain's not that scary? What if they're quite cowardly? What if their wrath comes from a place of fear? You know, like my sausage dog when he barks at big dogs. You know, like he's scared. But they
could also want change. I think if we go back to villains always think they're right, maybe your villain is an anti-hero to someone because they have an idea for change. The way they implement it is wrong and immoral, and there's people getting hurt from their actions. But that is a much more believable villain because you don't have to convince anyone. If you just change the perspective, you'd see like, oh, to someone that's completely in the right.
Yeah. That's the leader.
Silco is completely in the right for the people. What do you call it?
Zorn?
Yeah, I think that you're good.
Thanks.
You know, with what Piltover's doing, there's obviously an inequality in terms of wealth and stuff like that, and social class. And so he is someone's hero. He's fighting for the underdog there. But to everyone else, he just looks like an anarchist. He's just a menace to society, to like proper society.
Yeah, absolutely. He's also he's weak. You know, he's injured. He is skinny. Like, nothing against skinny villains, but when you see him, you don't think, oh God, how do I fight that person? But it's how he operates. He's surrounded himself with very powerful people. He's made allegiances. He is smart, you know, like you were saying with your doppelganger being, you know, not strong but clever. That's so much more interesting and also so much scarier, I think, especially to teach a party that they can't just throw fireballs at everything. You know, if you've got a kind of trigger happy party who are like, yeah, we can take that guy, especially in later levels, I think I'm sure a lot of DMs, and maybe you can relate to this, there's got to be some kind of sickening satisfaction to being like, oh, you thought? You're wrong. And, you know, give them that fight where they went in thinking we've got this, and they come out going, oh my God, we do not have this at all. That's fun. Or, you know, subverting their expectations that way. I'm sure you've had some pleasure from that at some point.
Oh, yeah. Sick pleasure. But that's something as well that you don't have to keep building. And you actually brought this point up to me, and I thought that is so great. You don't have to build your villain to be so powerful. What you can do is take away from the party.
Yeah.
Kind of what I was doing with the doppelganger, but you put it into words when we talked about this behind the scenes.
Yeah.
When they go into a township, they are not favored. They can't get a drink at the tavern. No one wants to do them any favors. They can't sleep anywhere. They have to just move along. The guard will actively maybe arrest them if seen on sight because of something that they've done that you want to punish them for.
Yeah.
You can kind of be villainous in how you treat the party, and it doesn't need to be with more power or more brute force. You can just take away.
I love that.
Do you? Because it's something that you said.
I know. No, I think you, like you say, you said it. I kind of put different words to it, but there's so many ways of doing that as well. There's, obviously within reason. I think sometimes there can be overreach with some things that the DM inflicts on a party, but taking away an item, starting to scry on them and giving them hints that they're being scried on, but not revealing the full thing. There's a lot of things you can do to start to build that idea of we're being inconvenienced here and the villain's not even here. They don't need to like rock up and open the door and be like, I'm monologuing every time they impact the party. It can be something that they're doing is just having ramifications. And I think that builds a greater relationship between the party and the villain than them having multiple conversations. This idea of like the party always being one step behind them, that's such a motivator for them to be like, we've got to get ahead of this person. We've got to figure out what they're going to do next. And I think that tension can lead to an amazing encounter later on rather than your villain. I don't know, I just find it really boring when they rock up all the time. It's like showing when you watch a really good horror movie and you never really see the monster and then they throw in like an awful CGI thing at the end and you're like, great, you've ruined everything. Like, I don't mean never show your villain, but at least if you're going to show them, make it good.
I think something can be said for show not tell.
Yeah.
And there's a way that I do that as a DM. But what I wanted to touch on with show not tell is the idea that, like you said, the villain is a couple of steps in front of the party at all times. But that... Actually, I'm scrap that. Don't even worry about it.
Uh-huh.
What I'll say is how I like to show not tell the party that something's going on is sometimes if I feel like my party's dicking around and they're not taking it seriously, I'll do an epilogue right at the very end of my session when everyone starts packing up their dice. I'll read out a scene that's happening. I'll role play with myself about a very short scene about what the baddie is doing. They might not know who this baddie is. They might not know where they are or what their current mission is, and I'll describe the events of what's happening in that current scene. And everyone is sat and they are paying attention because they're like, so while we've been on a shopping episode and
just boshering.
Yeah, and arguing with like some guy at the shipyard, there's an actual baddie who's making like real threats out there and is creating those ripples.
I love that. I love that so much. Especially, I'm sure every DM under the sun can relate to that. Like, I've got a villain ready for you. If you would just get to the point. I think that's such a perfect peek behind the curtain that also mirrors everything we love to talk about, film and TV. It's that moment before the end of the episode where you're like, what? Like, what do you mean? And it's that kind of cliffhanger that works great in a TV episode because you just want to watch the next one. But for a D&D party, that is crucial in terms of, will you get on track?
And it's completely meta, but that's the beauty of it. My players cannot act on it because they're technically not seeing it. They technically are not aware of these in-game things that are happening. But then when these ripples happen in-game, they start to think like, okay, that's got something to do with the scene that she told us about 4 sessions ago. And, I think that the best tool in the DM's toolkit is, what did I say it was before?
DM's toolkit?
Yeah. Holding back on something. Restraint. Oh my God.
Holding back on something. Also,
it's early. I haven't even finished my coffee.
The caffeine is not hit yet.
Jesus.
Restraint.
So I will do that sparingly. That might be once every 15 episodes.
That was what I was going to ask you actually. When you've done that, has it been every time?
No, because then they know what's happening. I want them to be scared of what's happening.
And almost be begging for another epilogue.
Yeah.
But you can't give them too much. I think that's lovely. It straddles that line between the players having information that the characters don't have, but that information being really helpful and just getting them more invested in the game. Because you could go the other route. You could be like, no, you need to get to that point until I give you any juicy villain stuff.
Absolutely.
But D&D games are volatile, and if people start to lose interest or, they start to create chaos because you're not kind of giving them that guidance, that can throw a campaign completely off the rails. So I think what you've described is such a good a good tactic to just give a little bite, just a little taste.
Yeah, because that's something else I believe as well. Along the same vein is that my party should be reacting to the DM. To the... My gosh, I do need a sip of that coffee. 1 sec.
Get it down, yeah.
Okay, let's start again. My party should be reacting to the villain, not the other way around. I often see people posting on Reddit or posting somewhere and it's like, my party has done XYZ. What should my villain be doing? Your villain shouldn't even know about the party, first of all.
Yeah.
If your party is anything less than like level 10, it's not in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, I mean, do you mean from like a BBEG standpoint?
Yeah, not a personal villain. They'll obviously, well, maybe not, but they probably know about the party. The BBEG should be, if they're any kind of BBEG worth their salt, they're clever, they're planning, they're plotting, they're behind the scenes making plans. They're not out there in the forefront. Well, they could be, I guess. And it takes away, again, that idea of like someone who's untouchable, someone like Silka who's surrounded by henchmen. That's the only kind of way I see that happening. But they should be in the background. They're unknown. Maybe they've got some sort of secret plot or plan that they're just pulling strings in the background so that they are creating the ripples of my world. Their trade with someone, getting a crazy magic item that has like blighted the land, that should be something that affects my party. That's not something that my party created.
Yeah. That's such a good point as well. And I think the point on the BBEG not knowing who anyone is such an important starting point for a good story, because your villains ideally should be scaling with your party. And your BBEG could have been, as powerful as they were right at the beginning. But like you say, they shouldn't know who the players are. And the satisfaction of slowly becoming a problem to the BBEG or slowly getting onto their radar is so satisfying, as a player, to be like, oh yeah, they know who we are now. Or we stopped that trade and now they're annoyed. They're not really that inconvenienced, but they at least are watching us. It obviously comes with a lot more danger, but it comes with a satisfaction that you wouldn't get if session 1 Strahd was like, hey guys, I'll be here waiting for you. See you in, session 100. I feel like there is something to be said for human nature in wanting to be noticed and wanting to, create change and things like that. And if you put a villain in front of your players that is like, I don't give a shit about you guys, that's a nice motivator for it might not bother the characters, but for the players to be like, oh, we're gonna cause problems for this guy. And I think that can be a great kind of motivator when you might be struggling again to get them on track, is just slighting them, maybe showing them that this villain really doesn't care and seeing what that creates.
Interestingly enough, I think that Strahd is the exception to that rule in some ways.
Yeah, actually, he does rock up pretty early.
He does, and I think like he knows who comes and goes from the mists.
Yeah.
And usually it's adventurers who he's like happy to have there, and sometimes they're by invitation, whatever it is. But I love the idea that your villain knows nothing about the players, as they shouldn't, and then once they become bigger fish in this pond, that's when the villain starts to take notice, and that's when they're a real problem.
Yeah, I think that's fun. It plays into, it's part of the villain's journey, it's part of their story, but it also is part of the hero's journey as well. Your hero doesn't start off usually a big hero, or it's fun to set them backwards, or put them in an unexpected situation. So even if you're a high level team, I think you need to scale the BBEG accordingly. They need to be even bigger than they would have been, and they need to be even bigger a problem. Or if you're looking to subvert expectations even more as a DM, be ready to let go of that one and show them that actually there was something bigger behind it. That's fun.
Bit of misdirection, a red herring.
Oh, love a red herring. Yeah, because that could be the ultimate, pulling the rug out from under the players when they're like, this is the BBEG, and then they fight them, 50 sessions in, and they kill them. What now? That could be, I would love that. If a DM had done that and went, haha, I planned this all along, you'd be so angry, but so excited to see what was next. So I think as a DM, there's also something to be said for like knowing that if your heroes are on a journey, your villain's on a journey, and your villain's journey could end as well, and being ready for that potentially.
I have had players kill someone that I considered like a bigger personal villain. Oh, it
really
hurts. It does hurt. But that is the nature of the game, and you have to reward your players for doing that.
Yeah.
I think that we've been in fights where we personally feel that person should have died, but they
100%.
narratively were kept alive. They had plot armor. And it's pretty brutal as a player to think, like, I was unconscious 10 times. I used every spell slot, every magic item I've got. There are no more health potions to my name. I lost an eye sometimes. Maybe my arm fell off, and they still get to walk away unscathed. My God, there is nothing more demotivating than... I'm like, so next time I come to the table, I feel... Do I want to be there?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think what we were saying earlier about giving the party something or slighting them to make them want more, it's a very fine line. And I think finding that line is important, like you say, because if you take it too far, you could actually demotivate your entire party or show them that the gap between them and the BBEG or whoever this villain is so big that they can't even envision themselves crossing it. I think you need to give them a chunk, give them something, show that maybe the villain, yes, they escaped, but they were afraid. There was something, just give them something. And that way, you know, they can go, okay, we didn't get them this time, but we learned what spells they have. We saw those legendary actions. We can start to gear ourselves up for that next fight or start to think about, okay, we can't fight this person. Someone like Strahd, for example. Early doors, you might be like, right, there's no taking this guy down. What do we do to get rid of him, or what do we do to inconvenience him in a different way? And that's when those kind of weird circles start happening where, you know, the villain's doing something to affect the world and you're doing something to affect the world, and where they interact could get really interesting rather than just see you on the battlefield in another 10 sessions and we'll give it another go, you know.
Yeah, that's so true. I could talk about Strahd all day.
I mean, it keeps coming up. We did play a little bit of Curse of Strahd, if you can't tell. I not a fan of that guy. You big fan.
Big fan.
Big fan. But we'll talk more about classic D&D villains later. I've got a quick question for you. Just more of a mechanics thing. When you've built a villain for your party, how do you write them out? Do you write them out like a slightly more detailed stat block, or do you write them out a bit more like a character sheet if you want to go in depth? I'm curious to know if you use like, you know, in our last episode we talked about bonds and ideals and flaws. Would you go that route to create a villain, maybe one that you want to stick around for a long time?
Oh, that's so great, because we talked about this just before.
Mm-hmm.
I think you agreed with me.
Yeah.
A way to really nicely complement the party in an oppositional way is to create a villain that maybe opposes the ideals, bonds, flaws of your party. So the morals, the drives, the passions of the party, if you want to take those, turn them on their head, you've got a villain. You've already got someone who now directly opposes the party and all that they stand for. Very easy way of doing a villain.
Oh, yeah, that's such a good point, especially as a DM if you're a bit like, how do I create something here that's going to interact nicely with multiple members of the party? Maybe seeing where members of the party have similarities.
Yeah.
Like you say, maybe they've all got at least a similar ideal. Maybe they're all lawful good by accident. Perfect. Create the opposite. Yeah, I love that.
Make a reflection of the party, or I mean, I love the idea of reflections in media. I think if you took someone like, this is an example that I think works really well. The Joker and Batman, Christopher Nolan version, they are such beautiful reflections of each other because they are so different and they stand for what the other person directly opposes.
Yeah.
Batman is order. He believes in law and, well, he's a vigilante. Anyway, we won't go to that. But the Joker is all anarchy. He believes in the lawlessness, the chaos, the non-organization. Those two forces are so oppositional. That is such a great reflection. Yeah. What a wonderful motivation for your party to take on someone who directly stands in the way of everything that they believe is good.
Genius. Yeah, I think it sounds so simple, but there's a reason that it crops up in almost every film, book, TV show you've ever seen. You know, this idea of, like you say, complete opposite morals. But also with the Batman and Joker, for example, that is a lovely example of a relationship between a villain and a hero. They, you know, obviously there's multiple different universes, multiple different stories, but from some of my favorite, you know, readings of Batman and Joker, they kind of need each other. They kind of love each other. There's like a weird symbiosis to them because you can't really have anarchy without chaos, and you can't have chaos without anarchy.
Joker is obsessed with Batman as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be, maybe it's a case of, right, I really want a villain who is a tormentor who is obsessive, who is constantly toying with the party. Joker's a great starting point for that, because also that's not just a evil versus good. There's going to be some interactions there where hopefully you can get your players to kind of want this guy around, kind of enjoy it. You know, with Batman and Joker, I feel like they gravitate towards each other, and that's so much more interesting than just, I hate you, you hate me, let's fight. You know, there's this idea of this contention between them is really fun. And I think some of the best roleplay moments come from when you get talking with, you know, the Joker to your Batman, and you start to understand them a bit better, and you're horrified because you understand them a bit better. You know, those moments are so interesting. So yeah,
reflections don't need to be opposites as well. You can show the hero what they could have been had their path been different. I really love the possibility of that, showing a villain who you know went to the dark side, and how easily that could have happened to the main character. And maybe that's what this hero is fighting against.
Yeah,
is that part of them that actually wants to follow in the footsteps of this villain.
Oh, I love that.
So especially if you've got a player who wants to play someone a little bit more morally grey, you can play with that.
Yeah,
you don't need to let the player dictate to you how chaotic they want to be. You can play with that.
Yeah.
Tease them a little, taunt them, give them opportunities. Maybe let them be a little bit evil, but then punish them.
Yeah, but always punish the players at the end of the day. No, I love that. I think using villains and all of these different ones that you have on the table as your sort of chess pieces to test the morality or test the bonds, ideals, and flaws of the players is a great idea. That's probably where the personal villains come in a little bit better. I feel like it's easier to make a reflection of a specific character if you give them someone maybe from their backstory, maybe a rival, maybe a sibling. You know, it's a little bit easier to dig into. But I think that's also where you can start to be more flexible, hopefully, as a DM, when you see things cropping up within the party, tension, certain moments where they're maybe not aligned. That's where you can slip in that villain who brings those questions in. And I don't think you should always be creating tension and pushing tension. But if the party's been getting along for a while, oh my God, time for them to have a fight. Time for some inter-party tension. Maybe you throw someone their way who you just know they're not going to agree on and go, have fun.
And maybe that restores party cohesion as well.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to the idea I like is that your villain is proactive and your players are reactive.
Yeah.
They should be at all points reacting to the villain, whether that's the villain making the moves in the wider setting, or whether that's the small personal baddie that you've brought in. How do you test the party's morality? What's the marker of how far they've come morally, or maybe how far they've degraded as well?
Yeah.
And if there's things going on in the party right now, can you test that? Can you test? And maybe what were their bonds? What were their flaws before? Have they changed now? Is their alignment shifting?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always, an interaction with your opposite or your villain should always kind of reveal something, hopefully, within the party. And otherwise, they're just a monster. If they just fight them and then walk away, I mean, you don't remember every monster encounter you have, but you should hopefully remember every interaction you have with the villain. And that's why I think they're good to use, like you say, sparingly, and use as tests and use as moments to kind of create those questions of, I love the idea of showing how far they've fallen in a way. You know, if your campaign's going in that direction and your party's kind of devolved slightly into things they maybe regret, using the villain to show them that regret.
They might be withered, they've fought too much, they've seen too much, they've encountered too much death.
Yeah. It's
time to give them a reality check, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where also it's interesting to bring in player-created villains as well. Bring up that person who they wronged, you know, in one of the first sessions, who has now got such a grudge against them that they're not dangerous, but they go back to that town and they see the ramifications of what they did. The dragon that they left rotting in the middle of the town. Now everyone's sick.
I kind of like the idea that the party would take the bait in that sense. And, you know, if your party is getting a bit too murder hobo-y, showing this person who's effectively an NPC, maybe they have 5 hit points.
Yeah.
They come in there, they've got maybe a magic item, and they're grumbling about, like, this is the dragon that you've left in the town. It stinks. And no one's coming there. There's no tourism, no trade. We've lost all money. Fuck you. And like they throw a gem with the genie in it. I don't know. And then the party goes ham on this NPC who has 5 hit points, and they're all surprised when one non-magical arrow takes them out. Oh my gosh, what a lesson, I think. Like,
yeah, what a great lesson.
Wow, that person was really a no one. And that they Yeah.
And you can balance this as well. Obviously, this isn't about villains, but I think we're talking here about a lot of bad situations. You can balance this with showing your party something that they did good and showing them how much good that has then snowballed into. So it doesn't mean constantly bringing your players down by being like, you shouldn't have done that, this is the consequence. I think you can balance that nicely with an NPC who they maybe saved and has now rewarded them with a magical item that they found.
What's rewarding players?
What do you mean? Never experienced it
We're
myself.
just talking about punishing here.
Yeah, well, mostly. But I think, there's ways you can balance that out as well if you would like kind of dips and troughs in that narrative. If your players are looking a little sad, maybe throw them a bone. But yeah.
It's all balance.
It's all balance. It's all balance. And the truth is that flaws in the story and flaws in the characters, flaws in the villains, they're not always happy, but they are really interesting.
So much more interesting. Nat 1s are always more interesting than Nat 20s, I believe.
Yeah, that is a great point.
You can't grow as a character or as even a villain if you don't have those flaws. I will stand by the fact that I think the most compelling flaw for me, well, it's not even a flaw, it's a flaw for them in their villain, is the possibility for redemption.
Yeah.
I think, and I know that you could argue the opposite, because there's nothing, I won't argue it for you, but there's nothing sometimes more exciting to see someone who is so bad that you just want to take them out. But for me, I want the opportunity that maybe I can fix them. Maybe I can. I know.
You'd literally walk into
He's so beautiful.
Strahd and go, I can fix him.
I can fix him. I still think that. But
we're still trying.
Maybe this villain, you can empathize with their plight, with how they got to where they've gotten, and maybe there's an opportunity that if you just spoke to them, they might change their mind.
It's the Undertale, thing. Undertale kind of came out and threw everyone for a loop because it was like, what do you mean I can just get through this entire game just talking to people and not kill anyone? And the entire point of that, at least in my reading, was to go, hey, have you ever reconsidered the way that you approach every situation ever? And thought there might actually be a better way of doing this. And I love that. I think obviously everyone loves combat. We love combat. But you've got monsters for that. Maybe your villain is just, like you say, maybe once they get spoken to, maybe there's another way around it. And I think because D&D can be so formulaic in some ways with heroes and villains and quests, it's very easy for us to see the beginnings of the BBEG and go, that's going to end in a big fight. I'm going to kill that dude. But that's not always a good story. Good stories are complex.
Yeah, and maybe you are able to talk that villain round. But then their plans are already in action and you have to deal with the fallout of what their plan was. Do you let them live? Do you punish them? They've already said, I'm sorry, but that bomb just blew up.
Yeah, so how do you
deal with it as a party?
Yeah, and that says more about the party than it does about the villain. I think the villain, like you say, your party should always be reacting to the villain. The villain should always be really telling you more about the players than it is the villain. The villain can be interesting to a point.
I love that.
Thank you. That another straight off the dome, not on the notes. What do
you mean notes? This is completely
we got no notes. I think the most interesting villains, like you say, are the reflections that show the player or the character or the protagonist something that maybe they don't want to know, but villains should maybe not be as layered to that degree, which also brings me on to my point of, I know you love redemption. I also love redemption. I think there's a scale, and I think there's a time and a place for all of them, and it also depends on the kind of campaign you want to run. Honestly, if you want to run a campaign where you fight Satan and you fight, just the worst thing ever and there's no redemption, that's fun. And you talked about, your players dicking around and stuff. I think sometimes having too much grey and too much morality confusion can lead players and parties to just start wondering because they start asking all sorts of questions and then they don't know what to do. Whereas when you put just the worst person ever in front of them, they can bond through that and they could go, right, we're all on the same page. So I think it does depend on maybe how your campaign's going. But there's something to be said for the classic Disney villain. There's been a lot of interesting discourse recently about Disney not really having a Scar or a Jafar, or we had kind of Elsa and she was the villain, but obviously
give me a Rasputin.
Literally, give me a Rasputin.
Disney, sorry, but no. I kind of consider Anastasia Disney adjacent.
It's Disney adjacent. It's parallel. But like you say, he's just bad. He's just evil. It's fun. It's camp. And I think there's nothing wrong with that either. But to illustrate the scale, I think a lot about Avatar: The Last Airbender.
She arrived with an Avatar jumper on.
I was wearing a jumper with the characters on it. It's my favorite show of all time. I think if you understand these characters, if you know these characters, I'll be brief, but in the family of Zuko, there is an entire scale there of normal person through to irredeemable. With his Uncle Iroh being, this lovely, sweet old man who is so funny. And then when you actually learn more about the show, you realize that he was a war general and he's killed a lot of people and he's wrought a lot of devastation, and he's redeemed now as, you can choose whether or not you forgive him, but now he's just an uncle and he's just trying to protect this kid and he's trying to, spread wisdom. He's redeemed to me. And then you've got Zuko, who is, eventually will be redeemed. Spoilers. Sorry, it's a really old show, so I feel like at this point you should have watched it. He will be redeemed, but he's on a journey. His sister is, truly villainous. She's bad. She's scary. She's messed up. But you get glimpses as to why she's messed up. And I feel like that's the kind of villain we've been talking about. This idea of like, on the surface, really bad, killing people, doesn't care what devastation they kind of leave in their trail. But then when you start to dig into it a bit, you see how hurt she is, how much damage she experienced as a child. So there's room there. She can either be the villain or she could be someone you have that conversation with. But then there's Ozai, the Fire Lord, who honestly, I don't think the main characters ever have a conversation with him. I think they literally spend 3 seasons going, we have to defeat him. There's no question. He's bad. And then they do. And it's just, he's that Disney villain. He's the, I'm going to, rule the world. There's no questioning. And I'm sure there is damage and I'm sure there is reasons as to why he's done what he's done, but you don't learn about it. And so that's where as a DM, you can take control of how much you give your players. If you want them to have an Ozai who you don't get that backstory, so you don't know why they're evil. You just have to deal with the fact that they are. What are you going to do about it? Great. But if you want to feed them a little bit more and go, maybe they were, they experienced a really awful childhood. Maybe they experienced something that one of your players has experienced. Ooh, like that's where you can start to, and you can basically just move along that ladder, I think. But it's interesting to me that the more I thought about it, the more I thought all of those characters are related. But they just explore so many different versions of villainy. Wow, that was a rant.
I feel like I need to watch this.
You should. You really should.
I'm missing out.
And anyone who hasn't, please do. It's a beautiful story, but it's a great example of showing that villainy is not straightforward. And there are moments as well when the main characters become villains to each other because they're kids and they act out and they get into fights. One of them runs off. Your players can be. There are moments where you're probably going to be villains to each other. Obviously, we've talked about antagonistic characters. I don't think it's a good idea to be the evil one in the party who turns on everyone. Oh, that's boring. But you're going to upset someone at some point. There's going to be an awkward conversation. It doesn't make you a villain, but you are on that spectrum of good and bad, and you're constantly going to shift around in it. And let that be interesting. If you created a lawful good character and you realize you've said something nasty, don't panic. Roll with it. And then maybe think, what if I got nastier? What does that look like? I think everyone should, I don't know if anyone else does this, but sometimes I have fantasies about what my characters would be like if they were the villain. Have you ever done that?
Well, actually, like the last character I played, it was very easy to imagine because I did eventually see her doing that. So.
Yeah, exactly. But this is what I mean when, you have a backstory that maybe lends itself to it, great. But also, even if you've created the nicest guy, considering what would drive this character to villainy, can just start to, bring up some interesting questions and see, as a player, how far you want to take that. Because it's not unheard of for people to lose their characters and then become NPCs that you fight later on. That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's when you as a DM need to step in and say, all right,
time to go.
You're treading into villain territory. Time to take that away. And now you have Bob the Goblin now. So
you've not got a choice. I think we've talked a lot about villains.
I feel like I could talk for another hour, which is so frustrating. So
maybe
we'll probably
2.
have to do part 2.
Yeah.
Should we have a quick break and then we can come back and answer some random encounter questions? Oh, wow. Random encounter questions. I need a break.
Stick around. We're going to have another coffee and then we'll be back. See you soon.
Bye. And we're back. And we'll be doing our random question encounter using these little cue cards that I love.
That's so cute.
Would you like to roll first?
Sure thing. I'm excited. Can I touch?
Please touch.
Lovely. A 3. 1, 2, 3. Best villain encounter in game. Ooh.
Oh my gosh, that's so tough.
Ooh. Also, to be fair, from your perspective, it could be a case of you being the villain.
Yeah, okay. Can I give both? Is that greedy?
No, not at all. Go for it.
Okay. Then my favorite villain that I've made was just a random villain. And I've talked to you about this one before. I saw on Instagram this beautiful Japanese myth about a woman whose head pops off during the night and floats around.
You have told me about this.
And I can never remember the name of this monster, so I'm just going to say that I took a random monster that starts with V and its head floats around and it sucks blood. And I had this woman sort of come to the party. She conveniently didn't know where she was. She went to sleep, woke up, her husband was dead next to her, and she ran through the forest, needed someone to help her get back to where they were going. My players were immediately suspicious because there's nothing I do that isn't without a purpose.
Never trust Mitch.
No.
At Mitch's table.
Yeah. And so they begrudgingly started taking her back, and then in the night, her head popped off while she was snuggling up next to one of the boys in the party. And everyone was rolling to try and wake up from the sleep, but their rolls were crap. So everyone was staying asleep while he was being entranced deeper into the forest away from the party.
Oh, that's fun. I was going to say, how does it attack?
Yeah, and then she just sucked his blood. I love a vampire. And
that is heinous.
It was so cool, and I was just giggling with glee the whole time.
Oh, I love that.
I was in my pixie vibes, and yeah, and everyone just looked so horrified and scared, and they wanted to help, but they couldn't. No one was waking up, and then eventually they did wake up, and they battled with her little severed head, and it was just so much fun.
I love that. I love that so much. Just a surprise and delight moment.
Oh, I love it. As a player, shout out to my first DM. I won't name names, but he's very great at voices and stuff like that. But he gave us a Christmas special because one of our players were banging on about doing a Christmas special. And he created basically an evil Santa on a reindeer, and it was pretty out of left field when I was like, this is bizarre. Oh my god, that battle was so freaking cool. The Santa was a warlock. We chased him down into the underneath part of an orphanage, and we battled with him there. I think one of the party members died. It was really sad, but I found it the most satisfying combat because I used every spell slot, every item I had. It was just constant chess moves. And so I just thought this villain was freaking amazing because he was so powerful.
Fun.
And it was just a dire deer, a dire reindeer, and some sort of warlock stat block. But he brought that character to life, and I think that was such a wonderful villain.
Nice. I love a special or a one shot to really push the bounds of creativity as well. I feel like that's where you can go, this doesn't count, this isn't canon, let's go weird. That's so fun. I love both of those.
Tell me yours, baby.
Ooh, there's a lot to choose from. I've had a lot of lovely encounters. I think when we say encounter, I suppose in my head that just means any time that you kind of came across them. I think one of my favorite battles was one in which I had a big moment for my character. She took down her mini boss. There was a Rakshasa. There was a lot going on. It was one of my favorite fights because it was a jam-packed map as well. It was a small room on a boat, but we were told from the beginning there was a lot in this room you can interact with. And this isn't really to do with the villain, but there was a moment where I administered a health potion to your character, and we later discovered that of the 4 health potions there were, multiple of them were poisons. So could have just finished her off, which I never would have heard the end of. So that didn't happen, thank God. But that was so fun.
That's the main thing.
That's the main thing, is that Midge's character survived. But it was basically because this was where the villain lived, so there was a lot of cool weaponry, there was gems, there was stuff that we could play with. So I feel like as an encounter that was really fun because it added more depth to, rather than just being in a blank room and being like, there's your villain. It was a big moment for my character. I decided to lose an eye. That is something you can do if you ever want to try it. And so at the end of it, on 2 hit points, my character lost her eye temporarily. She got some magic to help her out later on, but it was a big moment, and I think it was more of a big moment for me than it was for everyone else. But I think that's the beauty of the personal villains, is you can create this amazing set piece that is a bit of more of a love story to one character than the others, and it's still not such a big deal that the rest of the party can't just move on. So it was a great moment for my character. But I also love encounters where you just kind of chat. And when we played Curse of Strahd, I had a midnight conversation with Strahd, which was absolutely terrifying. And that was really fun because it wasn't a fight. It could have been, I guess, but he would have destroyed me in seconds. It was like I was caught sneaking around, and he invited my character for a drink. And it was this cat and mouse conversation of trying to get information out of each other. And I think that had more of an impact on me than a lot of fights, because I came away like, ooh, I shouldn't have said that. Or like, that was interesting what he said there. Can I use that later? And I think those types of encounters, are worth their weight as well.
Great answers.
Thanks. 2 for 2.
Yeah, I'll roll now. Oh. 5.
5.
Oh, okay. What do you think about if you as a player kill a villain, or if that you take care of them too quickly? How do you think that impacts the plot? Are you for it, against it?
I'm very for it. I think it's more of a DM problem. And I don't want to create problems for my DM. However, I think any story where, you kind of, I love it when I'm watching a film or something, and you know the general watch time of the film, and then they kill something big or the villain, and you're like, this isn't over. You know what I mean? That moment, or like, it happens in a lot of like slasher movies, for example, where it's like, he's dead, Michael Myers, we'll never see him again. You're like, yeah, right, we're 60 minutes in. And I think that presents hopefully some really cool opportunities to shock your players, give them the win, like we were talking about earlier, but kind of really bring in something truly scary and truly awful afterwards, and show that, that might have been the big villain of this city, but what about the big villain of the continent? And just kind of layer it up. I think as a player, I'd be really excited. I'd be sad to lose a good villain, and I think there is some grief in killing off a good villain. When they're really good, you are kind of sad to lose them, but I would just be like, right, what's next? But has that ever happened to you? Have you ever had... Oh no, you said earlier you had some early doors villains gone.
I have, but like I just had to accept it and move on. But I love that because you never know what's going to happen. It's like your character could die at any moment, so could your villain. So you've just got to do what Matt Mercer does and tear up the piece of paper and move on. And bring in either a BBEG or a personal villain that is more exciting or enticing, or just watch where the players are currently aligned toward, like what their motivation is otherwise, because then you can just make a bigger deal out of something else they're interested in.
Yeah, maybe you can go a few sessions as well and not have a BBEG. That's okay, because you can spend that time, like you say, studying the party and going, right, the first one was good, but how can I really make this one more of a reflection, more tied to what they've actually already done? And use it as like you say, a starting point to kind of just like tear up the paper and go, maybe I can make this better.
Yeah, and ham it up as well. Like, oh man, damn, oh, you guys are too powerful. Like, your players want to hear it. The one I know that as a player, I just want to impress my DM. And like,
he's teacher's pet, DM's pet.
Yeah, I have a DM's pet. I want like my DM to be like, that was some slick moves.
Yeah.
Nice job. And so, I would love the opportunity to tell my players, like, oh my God, you guys are just so clever. You're so powerful.
You got
I know
me.
that sounds really sarcastic, but it's not. So yeah, anyway, your turn to roll.
We're into it. My turn to roll a 4. What do we got? What's the most creative way someone has defeated a villain, or a way that you have? Again, from your perspective, maybe the way someone's defeated one of your villains, or how you've defeated a villain. I've seen you pull some very slick moves over time, to be fair. You're a good player.
Thank you. I like to think that I do have some Laura Bailey moments.
You have some brilliant, brilliant Laura Bailey moments. You're a very creative thinker.
Thank you. Wow. Unfortunately, my campaigns, most of them did not get to the point where they took out the BBEG. So
as most won't.
As most won't. scheduling is
the real
my
villain.
Satan.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that I've ever really been like, oh my god, that was so slick. I've seen them pull moves and I've just thought, wow, that smite did over 100 and something damage. Like that is so amazing. But I'm not sure that I have a story, unfortunately. I'm sure I will in the future.
Hopefully. I mean, we can only hope. I've also, to be fair, not seen too many crazy workarounds. I think one thing I was very impressed by once in the fight I was talking about actually with the Rakshasa is that our wizard took a big risk sinking some actions into trying to figure out the Rakshasa's name. We had some information on that map and it required a really high roll. There was a very good chance that they weren't going to make it. And so that was a calculated risk. And it was, I'd say that was quite creative because it was a case of we either keep throwing things at this massive demon and hope for the best, or, devil, sorry. I know the difference between demons and devils. I know the difference between demons and devils. And we could have, and we, some of us were attacking it point blank, but meanwhile the wizard was like, is there a better way to do this? And we figured out its name and took it off the board completely. And it wasn't the end of the fight because there was more stuff going on. But that was such a game changer and made for more interesting roleplay moments down the line because instead of that Rakshasa, regenerating and coming back and being, coming for us again as a villain, we actually worked with them later on because we knew their name and there wasn't really a lot they could do to fight us. So we just ended up kind of being friends. And I think that ended up being a more interesting story than just taking him down.
I think I've thought of my one.
Oh, yeah.
I talked about it and I was so meta about it as well when we started Wizards of Thay. But my rogue ranger build, she one-shotted a mind flare.
I do recall.
My God, I just basically used everything in my arsenal. There was like Raven Queen's Blessing. I had I'm looking at you for help. What is the Elven Accuracy? I had Elven Accuracy and Steady Aim, and so I just had like a million advantages on this damn roll, and I just did so much damage. And I just
one shot.
I just killed a mind flare. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then brought it up every single session.
And then when we're walking through, I'm like, wow, can you imagine?
Can you imagine?
I just feel like last time I was here, there was like an arrow through that little guy's. Maybe I'm thinking about someone else.
Yeah, no, I love that. Because that's not a case of being creative like around the mechanics. You just use the mechanics creatively and you're like, how can I stack as much of this as possible? I love that.
It's me min-maxing yet again.
You are a good min-maxer.
It's time to roll. Oh, I know, I've already done that.
Come on, D8. Oh.
I want to know this. Your favorite Dungeons and Dragons villain.
Ooh.
I already know who it is.
You do know who it is. I have played in a couple of official modules at this point. Interacted with a lot of classics. Our longest campaign was Waterdeep. There's some fantastic villains in that, and if you've not played it, there is a lot of interchangeable BBEGs there. And I think we talked to them all, which is great. So there was Manchun, there was the Castlanters, there was Jarl Axel. My favorite villain was actually a DM-made villain, I'd say. It was a real character called Saloon. Do you know what? I'm not going to actually try and say the surname because I'm going to get it wrong. But if you look him up, his name was Saloon. And he was such a big villain to my character. He was such a problem. He was so antagonistic, nasty, that I was convinced that after the campaign had finished, I would look him up and there would be this like amazing backstory and he'd have his own page in the book, whatever. This guy's a no one. He is just... This person is a, like secondhand to Jarl Axel. He hates elves. Honestly, I read the bio earlier and was like, no way. There's not even a picture. And I think the reason he was my favorite was because of the impact he had on my experience and what the DM made from him. So I think we could talk all about the Vectors and the Strahds, etc. But as a DM, you have the chance to make someone's favorite villain out of anything. Like whichever NPC you like. Take that tiny modicum of information and just create something really unique and special. Wow, I turned that into like a story time moment. But like, yeah, no, I think for me that was my favorite villain experience, and it wasn't even someone that anyone would really recognize, and I think that's really cool. What's yours?
I'm so torn right now.
Sorry, I was like, forget about Strahd. And I feel like you're going to say Strahd, which is valid.
Strahd for me was my personal favorite because of the effect he had on my character.
Yeah.
I'm going to be that girl and say that I had a romantic connection with Strahd.
You did.
Yeah. And so Strahd for me was such a fun villain because he was also my patron.
That's so fun.
Yeah, but also this character was in the Castellanta family. I am that girl.
She's not like the other girls.
Yeah, I'm not like the other girls. I'm playing a main character. And so Amalia was such a huge villain for me. She's is the Delilah of Waterdeep.
Yeah.
And so my character had mummy issues.
Yeah, she did.
As yours has daddy issues.
But she was scary. She was great.
She was fully scary.
She was one of those characters that didn't have, the fight with her was not easy, but she didn't have the craziest stat block. But in the room with her on that final fight,
she was a bitch.
Yeah, she was just the worst. And there was so many henchmen, so many people she'd gotten on side, so many scary people.
That town was not safe for us. There was hits out on us, and it was a mental game for me because everywhere we turned, my mother was trying to kill me. My mother was trying to.
Yeah,
it was great. Oh,
she was great for everyone though. That's the thing. I think a great villain kind of maybe means more to one character, but has the ability to mess with everyone. Or you all start to bond enough that you start to care more for that character's personal villain because you care more about that character. Now you're friends. I hate your nasty mum too. Which is true of real life. I've got some of my favorite real life villains are like relatives of my friends. I can't lie. When you hear someone's lore and you're like, oh, I despise your aunt, and they're like, no, it's my aunt, and you're like, no, that's my BBEG. Like, God forbid I turn up to the family barbecue and she's there. So I think caring about your fellow players can lead to, someone's personal villain being your villain too. Amalia was great.
Yeah, I hated Saloon as well.
You hated Saloon as well. We all, you're Mikasa Sukasa, my villain, your villain. Is it me? Yeah. Lovely. Oh, that was my leg cracking. Two.
Oh.
Speaking of Strahd, how romanceable do you like your villains?
Wow, what a tough question.
Very.
Yeah, very. I think it's so fun. Like, being romanced by the villain, is there anything sexier? And I know that my book talkers will agree with me. We love an enemies to lovers or lovers to enemies. We love it all.
Yep.
And I can't think of anything sexier than being bloody mind games with Strahd and then invited to his chambers later.
Yeah. No, it's very fun. I think obviously romance is its own topic. Stay tuned. That one will definitely come up at some point. But if the players and the DM are into it, romanceable can mean so many different things as well. Could it be that that's how they are truly defeated, is that they fall in love with someone in the party, or they fall in love with an NPC and
love can redeem?
Or is it a way that I've seen great examples of people romancing villains to get more information, or it's pretty heinous.
So much subterfuge in all of these.
Do
a Red Sparrow, it's endless. And I, as a DM, I would love for my players to romance my villains. It doesn't often happen, but romance me.
Romance Mitch. That is actually a general PSA, I think. I've heard that complaint from multiple DMs that they're like, everyone's romancing each other at the table, but no one's romancing me.
I want to be romanced.
Yeah, and your fleet of NPCs, all of which are sexy.
I make all of them super hot and no one is going near them.
Yeah,
Come
absolutely.
on.
I think it's because there's a level of fear there, where it's like, as player characters, we're all like, we're the goodies, we can all romance each other and it will be a relatively normal story.
Mine's a doppelganger.
Yours is a doppelganger. So I think there's risk, there's inherent risk. But yeah, romance is very interesting. It can be really funny and it can be very serious. So
Minty's a fan of a handhold in games. So.
I love just holding hands. Look, okay, let me give you a little bit of context here. So you get excited for when we do talk about romance. We had characters who were in love. However, it took approximately 50 sessions for them to hold hands, and it is entirely my fault. It's not my fault I created an awkward character. Or maybe it is. Yeah, I didn't make her very romanceable from the beginning.
Little self-insert there.
Just a little self-insert there, maybe. Hey, play what you know at the end of the day.
Play to your strengths, baby.
Play to your strengths. I don't know how many of these we got left. Is it worth rolling? I don't think we've covered question...
Those three.
Oh, okay. Definitely roll for it then, I'd say.
I think it's your roll.
Is it my roll? No, I asked you how romantical do you like your villains?
How romantical do you like yours?
Oh,
I didn't ask you.
Very.
Very. Oh, okay.
I want the option at all times. You're just...
When the dice don't cooperate. Oh, yeah, that works. Mm-hmm. Okay, Minty, your favorite class build for a villain?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Obviously, I've not built one myself.
Is this your powerful mage? Is this your stealthy rogue?
I think
deadly fighter.
I'd love to see deadly fighter really fun. Because I do think with fighters, there's always the question of how did you get good at that? Because fighters come out the gate in their description for level 1 as like seasoned fighters. There's no like you're training, you're someone's squire, like you know your way around a sword. So I think that's always really interesting because there's been some amazing villains, you know, over time that are just really accomplished combatants. Great villain. Great for combat. I would love to see more villainous clerics, villainous, you know, like any class that you think if a player was going to pick it, they'd probably be on the good side of the alignment. Flip it. You know, I want to see a religious fanatic who is, you know, maybe that's a bit close to the real world in some ways, but like I want to see someone who, like you say, thinks they're doing all the right things, but is doing it in terrible ways. You know, cult leaders and stuff like that. That would be really cool. So yeah, I think I've not really seen it at work, but next time I play at your table, if you could throw a cleric my way, that would be really cool.
Definitely.
I just think warlock and rogue and fighter and stuff, it all lends itself to, not lends itself to villainy, but lends itself to, you know, I'm good at fighting and I kill people. But what if, you know, you're a paladin or you're a healer and you've got a bit more of a moral code? I'd be really interested to see what that means in a villain setting. Do you have a favourite build that you tend to veer towards?
I think my mind went towards magic users. I love a hag. I love a mage.
Oh, yeah.
I love an intelligent enemy. And I love being counterspelled. Like, no one loves it, but like, I do love
it's a great
challenge. But I think that a hybrid is really special. Someone who is not necessarily, I don't think like any villains are necessarily like step block. They have their class. It's usually like a mishmash of different abilities.
Yeah.
But I like the opportunity to go toe to toe with magic, but then also have them come down on my ass with a sword. So yeah, something in the middle. I like my characters, to have a lot of utility. So I'd like a villain that has the same.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, trust me to not mention min-maxing whatsoever. I would create a villain that was so killable. That's a really great point. And also, I suppose you could use villains or NPCs or, you know, characters that aren't the players to show the players what they could do as well. Especially if your players haven't multiclassed yet. That might be a nice way of going like, look, you could take this and then you'd be a little bit more like this guy. That would be fun, I think. Nice. Oh, thank you.
We've got 2 more.
2 more.
So anything like above 4.
Anything above 4 would be lovely. It is a 4. Let's take the next one. Where am I looking?
1, I think.
1. We kind of briefly touched on this. Have you considered a villainous path for your PC?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I don't want to take up too much time. But yeah, this is the one who I always talk about. She Strahd's gal and Castellanta, but I couldn't see a way that I would be satisfied narratively if she was completely redeemed.
Interesting.
If she was going to be like aligned, if there was an alignment, if it was binary, I did have her skewed more towards evil, purely because of her upbringing, purely because of her brainwashing, and the effect that her family and her romantic life had on her. I thought that it could go either way, and I'd planned for both. I had planned that either had Minty's character not been able to successfully romance her, I would hand her over to the DM and say, like, here's another...
no pressure on me.
Yeah, and it's all on you. Another baddie for you to have in your arsenal. And I would have been happy for that to have happened. I think I would have liked to have played her out, but that's not my choice. And there was the option for redemption as well. So
yeah, I like that you had both options. I think that's a good idea for any player to, you know, if you're considering going evil, know what would get them out of that. And the same way the other way around, as we were talking about earlier. If you are the goodie, what would make you evil, and just being prepared for that. It's just a fun exercise, even if it never comes to fruition, I think.
There was a lot of trust there, I think, as well. I should just touch on that because it is tough as a DM to have an evil party member.
Yeah.
But she wasn't working against the party. They did have a lot of aligned goals. It's just more that there was the opportunity that when things really heated up, it could go that way. But how about you?
I have considered it. I considered it the more we got into the story and the more that started to go wrong. It was what would be the kind of straw that broke the camel's back.
It's Bashaba.
Yeah, it was Bashaba cursing my character, and my character kept tripping over every 5 seconds. There was a lot of great moments that were so emotionally taxing that, like you say, you start to think, how can my character make it through this without sort of becoming the villain a little bit? But I did the same. I think I had the different routes that I wanted to explore, and I was open to any of them. So I think that's a good lesson, is to be open-minded, as you should with most things.
I think there's one last question.
Final question at the
Let
bottom.
me read it to you. Oh, favorite media villain.
Favorite media villain. Ooh, we've already talked about The Incredibles. I would say Syndrome is probably up there.
Spoken about Avatar.
I've spoken about Zuko. Oh my god, I've actually covered all of my favorite media villains. I'm going to throw another one in there that I think is just super fun, and take from it what you will. But you were saying that you hadn't seen Misery, the film. The main character in Misery is so terrifying, and is an example of what we talked about earlier, of just taking away from the protagonist. The protagonist is a strong man. However, he has undergone an injury, and she is taking care of him. So immediately he's at a disadvantage. And I've read the book, I've watched the film. It is just one of the most horrifying things to imagine, that you are physically trapped by someone who should not be able to physically overwhelm you, who is not as smart as you, but because they've got you in this specific set of circumstances, you're at their, behest. You have to do whatever they want. And it ends with him sort of playing mind games to get out of it. But she's a truly scary villain. So I think she's one of my favorites. I need to go back and watch the film again. But if you want, an example of a bit of a joker, a bit of someone who is really quite far gone, she's a great example.
I think I'm going to have to watch this.
Please do. You? Favorite media villain?
Oh, it's between two people and for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I love Ozymandias, however you want to say it, from Watchmen, specifically the movie. I have read the comics, but I think he's such a beautiful anti-hero in that he has such a clear idea of how he thinks things should be done. He unites people under a common enemy, which is Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah.
He brings together Cold War America and Russia, but the way he does it is terrible.
Yeah.
He creates like a nuclear bomb that kills many. But he just thinks he's right, and he thinks, well, this will save millions. Like the cost of this outweighs the cost of that. And I think that's like, it's great. It's like the Thanos argument. Like you can completely side with him, even if you're like, Jesus. And also Scarlet Witch, I talk about her all the time. She's my girl. Grief as a motivation is so beautiful. The way her grief manifests into her power and takes over the town in WandaVision. I just think that's so beautifully done. It's not a simple feminine trope of revenge or she poisons someone. It's like something so human, something we all go through in our lives, which is grief and just how that manifests. Yeah. And in the end, she has to make a decision. And she does, but she is the villain for the longest part, I think. And I don't like what they did to her in later movies, because I think that they sort of made her a bit crazy. But
yeah,
in WandaVision, she was pure. I completely empathized, and I just think that she's great.
Yeah, she's really fun. I think that's a great example of, like you say, a really human motivator. Does it make it okay? That's kind of up to you to decide. I love that. That's kind of the end of our questions.
It is, and that's the end of our show, I think.
Gosh, we get through these things so quickly, but we have so much to talk about.
Plenty more to yap on as well.
Plenty
so I think
more to
that
yap on.
part 2 is probably going to be necessary.
Yeah, definitely. We'll come back to villains. But in the meantime, let us know in the comments, if you're a DM, what's a cool villain you've spun up? If you're a player, what's your favorite kind of villain to fight against? And thank you as well to everybody who has already commented and already interacted with us on our first video. It has been so lovely.
Yeah, we put a little post on our Instagram just to point out some of the beautiful comments we've got, and we are paying attention. We're looking through everything that comes through to us, and it's so lovely. This community is great, and we've just been feeling so embraced. So thank you so much for the support.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. And please leave a comment on this. If you are listening to us on Spotify, you can go check us out on YouTube. If you are watching us on YouTube, go check us out on Spotify. And as ever, hit us up on our socials. We have, a lot of episodes lined up, but we really want to hear your questions, your thoughts, your feelings. We want to, make this content as helpful as possible. If you can take anything away from this, then that's the dream. So let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, keep rolling.
Bye.
Bye.